Hey, Suncrest, we're back. I do have a new guest in the room. Instead of Mitch sitting across from me, I have Stephanie Charbonneau, who's been on our staff for a short time now and has been at our church for a little while now. So I cannot wait for you to meet Stephanie and hear from her. I think she's the perfect person actually to share this podcast about necessary masculinity. So first, Stephanie, we should just have you introduce yourself. Tell us your story
Great.
quickly, briefly, but
Sure.
you're good at this. Go
Yep.
for it.
My name is Stephanie Charbonneau. I have been here at Suncrest for a few years now, but started growing up going to church with my grandma and kind of fell away from my faith fully, actually, through high school and college, and got into just a different lifestyle. And on the outside, it looked like I had it all together. I was still succeeding socially, in my work and in college and in school and in all the things. But I was doing a lot of partying, and on the inside, there wasn't that moral compass, and there wasn't this. Like, I wasn't being led, I wasn't following God, I was very much serving myself. That sort of led me to get married pretty young to the wrong guy for all the wrong reasons, and shortly after realizing that and going through a divorce, meeting my husband, who attends here as well now, and Mike was going through a divorce at the same time. We were what would you call a hot mess at the time.
It's a technical term.
Oh, that's a technical term for sure. But in that, I knew that there was something special and that God gave us the gift of each other. And Mike has told his story publicly, but we both hit a rock bottom the same night, and it's not a coincidence that
Right.
that happened the same night that Mike was on railroad tracks driving, got his car stuck. I attempted suicide that night. And so that was a shift in life when you wake up the next morning, you're like, wow,
Yeah.
okay, well, something's got to change. Something's got to change here. And at that point, I started seeking. I had a lot of moments where God stepped in vibrant ways that no one else can really fully understand except for me, because he came to me and gave me that peace
Yeah.
that I didn't understand what it was at the time, because I wouldn't have called myself a Christian at that point, and I didn't understand it until later when I came to understand that peace.
Yes.
How did I have peace in that moment when it was anything but? But he did, and he was calling me. And slowly and steadily, with the help of a lot of therapy and a lot of people who along the way encouraging me, I healed my mind, my heart, my thoughts, and found my faith.
Yes.
And it's been amazing now, because to know that depth of despair and depression, and then to be in the joyful state, that I feel like I'm an incredibly joyful person. I've been blessed with that gift, and I know where it comes from. And I am just so grateful
Yeah.
for all of it, even the hard things
Yeah.
that we went through in our marriage, in our relationship. You know what I mean? It was a lot to work through, but I look back now on it, and I'm so thankful for it.
Yeah.
Because without the destruction and the rock bottom, we were built on sand.
Right.
And we went down to the rock, and we built on that. And it's been a slow and steady build ever since. And man, life is just incredible. We have two amazing boys, Charlie and Merritt.
Yep.
Great families. We're steady. We love our work. I'm a new employee here,
Yep.
and I love it. And never in a million years would I have thought that this would.
Yeah. You're working at a church.
Oh my gosh, like crazy. And I'm so grateful to be doing it,
Yeah.
and to be used by God. I know it's like to change lives, but like, that's what I've asked for.
Story.
That's what I've prayed for. And I've been redeemed, I've been transformed.
Yeah.
And now I feel like because of all of that, I have a new compassion and understanding for people who are there. And I know that part of that suffering, actually, probably all of it, was to say, okay,
I have something for you.
come on over.
Yeah.
It's great over here. You can do it.
Well, anyone around Suncrest knows that, I'm a sucker for a story of an authentically changed life, right? One of the things we say is we're fascinated by seeing God actually at work in someone's life. And I want you to know, I want everyone to know, like, if someone tells me today that they changed yesterday, I don't put them on a podcast tomorrow. Like I want to see that this transformation has taken root. It is built on a rock, and in you and Mike and your family, it's been very inspiring to see the transformation, and you're doing a great job here. I could go on and on about Stephanie's praises, but then we do this Necessary Masculinity series, and it's I said, oh, I want Stephanie on the podcast because actually, like a year ago or so, you and I sat down and talked because you've led a group of women in our church. I lead a group of guys at our church. It may even be that there's some cross pollination
Yeah.
of guys who are in my group are married to women who are in your group.
Mhm.
And we had a chance to talk about just the dynamics of masculinity,
Yeah.
wives and husbands, and how that's at work. And it's not easy to sort out a
No.
lot of times. But I thought it was a great conversation. So I thought, okay, here we are. Let's talk about this
Awesome.
together. So obviously it was a series called Necessary Masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
You are married to a guy and you have 2 boys.
2 boys.
And so my mom had 3 boys, and she always said, I have 4 boys, because she was talking about my dad as the fourth boy.
Yeah.
She's like, it's a very interesting life to be only guys in the house.
Yep.
So when you experienced it, this necessary masculinity, I'm curious, what was that like for you? What did you guys take away from it? What hit you along the way?
A lot of it hit really close to our story. The man that I met in Mike, I should say the boy that I met in Mike,
Honestly, yeah.
is not the man that I am married to today. And I have seen such a personal, I've been up close, had a front row seat to an incredible transformation of a man, of a boy to man. And what that means, that sacrifice of self, is something that I've seen my husband do. And so for me, it brought up a lot of it, and in a great way of gratitude for what those little shifts and the real honest look at oneself.
Yes.
And being willing to do something small along the way, the transformation, because a lot of what's happened in the story that I've told you, this has been a decade.
Right.
And so those little things, what happens a decade later is incredible. And those small transformations, I know it's masculinity, but I've been doing it along the way too.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, I'm sure there are a lot of other women out here, but I consider myself maybe a little bit more masculine woman in a lot of my style of maybe my leading sometimes. And I can be very soft, but I've got that in me.
Yes.
So although it was maybe speaking to the men, it was hitting me too.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things when I was prepping the series, I'm like, okay, I'm aiming at men.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible calls men to sacrificial responsibility, and it transforms us and transforms the world. But if you're like, does the Bible call women to sacrificial responsibility? The answer to that's yes, too, of course. And so it's not always so distinct. It's just interesting to apply it in our own situations.
Right.
So, yeah.
And in our role, my role as a woman being married, how are there certain ways that I can better support my husband and all the men in my life that I love?
Yeah.
And what is my role in that, in giving them the space, the encouragement, the appreciation for, and all of that as they are changing and as they are open and willing to make more sacrifices that they're doing, and just a different way of thinking about how they're living.
It is. And I mean, sometimes about the scriptures, I'll say they're not true because they work. They work because they're true, right? The scriptures give us this truth. And when you implement it and doing things like, instead of complaining, controlling, nagging, I'm actually encouraging, that's actually then what's met with the response of, I want to grow.
Yes.
And again, that's both directions, husbands and wives, right? But it's like, okay. And then when you step into I'm actually going to say no to myself for the good of my family. Again, husbands and wives. It's like, look what God does through that. And it gets myself out of the center of my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's lots of things on here we could chat about.
Indeed.
And I know we're probably both most excited about the last question on here, but there's some quick ones that people have asked us about. So I thought, let's hit some of those quickly.
Sure.
I'll let you kind of lead through some of these questions. I'll answer as best I can and just
Sure.
go from there.
In our society today, there are so many ideas of what masculine and feminine, or what they are not even. Um, as the church, should we embrace those? Should we reject those? What does that look like for us?
Yeah. One of the things I love about being a pastor is you kind of get to look at the whole scriptures, and it takes you out of just, the moment or the decades you're currently living in as a society. So I think, of course, there are cultural distinctives. What people don't always appreciate is those have shifted over the years,
Mm.
right? Is long hair manly or is short hair manly? I'm like, well, you tell me what century you're talking about, and I'll answer the question different ways. And what that means is there's not a universal answer to that. There's the way people are doing it today, right?
Yes.
And I just want people to appreciate the cultural distinctives aren't really usually biblical distinctives, right? I think I joked in one of the messages that you might be a hunter, a fisherman, all that, or you might be what some call an avid indoorsman,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
I actually just like to hang out inside. And I'm like, it's not one of those isn't manly and the other not manly. It may be perceived that way culturally. So I think for the most part, we should probably step back from the cultural distinctives. Um, we're not going to dive deep into this, but there is a lot of conversation about gender
Of
in
course.
today's world, and what is a man, what is a woman, and I actually think a lot of times those conversations uh, are are not helpful because they only live at cultural levels.
Mhm.
Oh, I like this, or I don't like that, or I prefer this, and people attach that to either being a man or being a woman, but it actually has nothing to do with being a man or a woman. One of the stories I talk about with this is Esau and Jacob, in the Old Testament. This is Genesis chapter 25. And, in that story, there's two twin brothers. But one did what was perceived as manly things. He was a hunter. He went out. He was a hairy dude. He was dad's favorite.
Mm.
And, the other stayed at home with mom, cooked dinner, those sorts of things. They were both guys, right? And I'm like, oh, you can just feel all the cultural pressures, like,
Mhm.
oh, if he's like that, that's a real man. When actually none of that, none of the cultural distinctives are what it means to be a man,
Right.
right? It's so much deeper than that. Is the sacrificial responsibility. I'm like, okay, that's what God calls you to be if you're a man. I don't
Yeah.
care about pink and blue. I don't care about facial hair. I don't care
Mhm.
about long hair, short hair. It's okay to care about, like, I don't, if someone's like, that's important to me, I'm like, well, let it be important to you. Just don't lay that on half of the human race
Right.
and,
Right.
and the rest of your gender. So
Right.
that's a long answer to a short question.
Absolutely. Okay, another question for you, Greg. During your sermon, you had mentioned that marriages that are coming out of conservative Christian homes have the highest satisfaction. Yet, most violent men were conservative,
Hmm.
but not affiliated with church.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's up with that?
It's absolutely wild. And I've thought about it a lot since then because, again, this study is not a Christian study. It's University of Virginia. And I had a few good conversations. But I just want to say something I think is a very important conclusion. So, centering your life in Christ is an identity for people. I hope it's people's primary identity. Sometimes when they become followers of Jesus, that's what I say. I'm like, well, you just identified yourself as a follower of Jesus. Now everything has to come to alignment with that. But we know in our world today, a lot of people, a big part of their identity is, am I liberal? Am I conservative? Am I progressive? Whatever. And it's politics, but it's not just politics. It's like, oh, we wear those labels. And it was so striking to me when I came across this stat that said, hey, conservative people who are really rooted in faith, man, rich relationships.
Mhm.
Conservative people who aren't rooted in faith, maybe the worst of all for our world. Like, I know that's a pretty strong thing to say, but I'm like, oh, this is where if your main affiliation is about your philosophy or your politics, it'll go wrong so fast. And I've had to reconcile a little bit myself because I'm a relatively conservative person to think, hey, do I resonate more with people who are also relatively conservative but not Christians? Or do I resonate with people who are Christians? They're following Jesus, but their views might be a little more progressive or liberal.
Mhm.
And that's what really struck me about this is like, I hope we all can appreciate as followers of Jesus, our close circle is other followers of Jesus, no matter where they are on the political spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And if instead I find myself being anti-Christians who are a little more on the other side of a spectrum, but I'm rah, rah, rah with people who share my politics but not my faith, then I just feel like, you should take a deep look inside.
Mm-hmm.
You should really take a deep look inside and say, what does this say about me and what is most central to me? So, not to get political, but I think we all have to reconcile that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, we see this a lot, in the church, in our church too. How does someone walk the path when they're going to church, maybe bringing their children even, and they're married and their spouse is not a believer?
Yeah. How many pastoral conversations have I had about this? A lot, right? And interestingly, it used to be almost all women who would ask me about being married to a guy who's not a believer. And these days, that has shifted to be about 50-50 guys who are believers, but their wife is not
That's very
necessarily.
interesting.
So, and the scriptures address this. I'm actually going to read a passage from 1 Corinthians 7. It's not a detailed answer, but you can plant your foot on this and build a life out of it. Paul actually writes this. He's talking about marriage. He's just finished talking about, two Christians who are married to each other. And then he says this, to the rest I say this, I, not the Lord, if any brother has a wife who's not a believer and she's willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who's not a believer and he's willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. So what Paul is saying here is, hey, you've experienced a transformation in your life, but you made a covenant, and it's a covenant based in God and faith to your marriage. And so like don't take like, hey, now we're not on the same page as a motivation to exit
Yeah.
this marriage. He's saying, no. It's going to transform you. He actually essentially says next, I hope it will lead the person you're with to eventually embrace Christ himself. But even if it doesn't, you made this union with someone. And so you live out your faith there and be patient, with your spouse who isn't there.
Hmm.
And then it says this, but if the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother or sister is not bound to such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace.
Yeah.
And I think that's not his desire. That's not God's desire that the marriage would break. But if you living out your faith, humbly, patiently, lovingly, does create something in your marriage where he or she just says, you're a different person. I can't stay. I'm out.
Right.
Then God says, okay, you can let that be also. You can let them go and move forward from there. And I mean, there's a lot underneath that for how it works in everyday life.
Right.
But I think those are big principles you can live on. You run into people like this. I'm curious
Well,
what
I've been one.
you've been one.
I've been one. And let me encourage anyone out there. My husband started reading the Bible before I was a believer. I would have called myself spiritual for sure, but I was not following Jesus. And I didn't know how I felt about Jesus and Christianity in general, from a lot of cultural ideas, which understandably, I understand how someone would get there. But he was never really pushy.
Mhm.
And he still kept doing it, and I saw the transformation in him, and I think the seed was always in me, but watching that happen and being in the presence of it over time led me to become more open and to say,
Mhm.
maybe there's something here for me. Maybe there's something in this, and it was a slow walk, but
Mm.
now I'm working at Suncrest.
Yeah, here we are. Oh, I just want to like louder for those in the back, right?
Yeah.
You're a follower of Jesus.
Yes.
You do it faithfully,
Yes.
right? You're not trying to force someone. He wasn't forcing you
Mhm.
for this, but you see the transformation happening in his life. That's the best thing that can happen.
Yes.
If you're genuinely a follower of Jesus, let the transformation happen in you. You will become more graceful.
Yeah.
You'll become more merciful.
Mhm.
You'll become more servant oriented. Right?
Absolutely.
That's how it will show up in your marriage and in your life. And it commonly is a magnet then to the other person to be like, I was skeptical at first, but I actually kind of want what he has.
Yeah.
I want what she has.
And he would do the uncomfortable things in front of me. We would pray, and I prayed still, but he would pray and he'd close it in Jesus' name.
Yeah.
And that was the part for me that I was uncomfortable
I'm
with.
not so sure about that, Mike.
But he will say it now. He goes, it was very uncomfortable because I knew how you felt about it, but he just kept doing it.
Yeah.
He kept doing it. And now
Yeah.
I close out just about every single
Well,
prayer with it.
Yeah. And I mean, I know your husband a little bit. He's a sharp guy, or he's a smart guy, and a guy of conviction. But like, that's just it, right? I'm willing to step into what's uncomfortable but right.
Yeah.
It's been a theme for us over the last couple of years. But I just think like, yeah, that's what he did, and it's a tough line to be like, I'm not being pushy on someone, but I'm also not backing down
Yes.
from what I have conviction about.
In fact, I'm going to continue to go deeper because God's calling me, and he knew that.
Yeah.
And he kept going, and he was faithful. And man, was God faithful to him in turning his person,
Yep.
Into a believer and revealing himself. So wonderful.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. What's next?
Okay. Is there a difference for what you give your life to if you are single versus married with kids?
Yeah. I was confronted with this because I mentioned a couple times in the series. I asked the guys in my men's group, what would you give your life for? Who would you give your life for? And I hadn't thought about this before that, but I have a son who's single. He was in the Marines. So obviously if you sign up for the Marines, to some degree, you're saying, I'm willing to give my life for my country. And one of the stories I tell about Terrell is that actually I think by the time he was a little way through the Marines, he would actually say, I'll give my life for my brothers, right? For whoever's fighting next to me. It was more relational than conceptual. But when you're single, I mean, why do we sign up guys who are 18 for the military, right? Because you don't have other responsibilities relationally. And I think very much it does change when you are married and you have kids. That should be the exact moment you reset, what would I give my life for? And you don't have to say yes to all the things you had said before, because now you've accepted a new responsibility. Paul even, it's actually kind of in the same passage of 1 Corinthians 7, he talks about ministry, right? And he says, I wish everyone was as I am. Paul was single, right? He could give his whole life. He could travel the Mediterranean. He could do it all. He said, because once you get married, you can't do what I'm doing.
Right.
You have a responsibility to your spouse. And so I think, yeah, appreciate each season of life, right? Told the story about the young guy, in the restaurant, 20 years old, and he stepped up, put himself out there in front of others, right, to save life. And on one hand, I hope any guy would do that. But if it was me, I do have to think, but what about Jenny? What about my kids? What about Davion needs a dad, right? He's growing up. And so I just want us to have an appreciation that once you're married, the first thing you give your life for is your spouse and your kids. And then we still live sacrificial responsibility beyond that. When you're a single guy, you give your life for the cause.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Right.
Any thoughts on that?
I couldn't help but think for like a young man, like what is that cause? Where does that come from?
my goodness.
And where are they looking for it? And I know that is a very loaded question.
Well, I think it's a needed question today because, we know that aimlessness, purposelessness is a real thing in today's world. Not for everybody, but there could be young guys watching this and feeling like, yeah, I don't know what my cause is. And I would just want to encourage you to say, take your half a day, right? Go sit down, you and your Bible and a pen and God. Say, God, what am I supposed to give my life to? He will speak to you, right? You may or may not like what he's saying, but he will speak and he'll prompt you in certain ways. Then do it with a community, friends of yours, your group at Suncrest, whatever. Because I think if young men can find this, I think even for myself, obviously I didn't go into the military, but the notion of being a pastor and saying, I'm going to give my life to ministry, right? I was 17 years old when that happened. And I feel like it was a gift to me to know what I would give my life to.
Yes.
It set a course of responsibility to all right, well, I know what I'm doing. Let's go. So.
Yeah, I think so many young people especially are on a mission to find their purpose. Like, I feel like that's a theme for them and trying to find it, especially when they don't have the responsibility of family and marriage and all of that stuff, because there is a lot of space.
There is.
To be used for whatever they end up landing on. Do you have any advice for someone who's looking for their purpose?
Yeah, I do. I'd say go deep on one or two things. And the moment you realize, actually, I went deep on this and it's not what I'm supposed to do, and get out of it as fast as you can.
Yeah.
But what I see a lot of people do, and I understand why they do this, they kind of dance around with 15 different things. And when you're dancing with 15 different things, none of them are a big enough deal in your life to give your life to something. And so, I told that story this past weekend and after Necessary Masculinity about grabbing hold of that branch and seeing if it holds. But I think for someone who's honestly flailing a little bit in life, like, I'm not sure what direction to go, like, you have to grab a hold of something. And I could even, like, email me. I'll give you some suggestions of what to grab a hold of and go for it. And then if it holds, that's what you're supposed to go for. Just don't be spread so thin. Don't try 15 different things. Go deep on one or two.
Yeah.
And if they're not it, exit it as fast as you can.
And like there comes to be this good feeling once you start doing it where you're like, wow, I feel gifted in this. Like I feel that I'm working within my specific individual gifts that God has given me. And I can see how this is a space where that gets to shine, which blesses all the work that is going into it.
I'm glad you said that, because certainly paying attention to how God created you. I mean, God gave everyone certain abilities. He's given people who are followers of Jesus spiritual gifts from his Holy Spirit. And those gifts are absolutely a help to help us see this is what I'm supposed to be doing, right? I feel like God gave me a teaching gift, right? If he didn't give me a teaching gift, I should not be doing what I'm doing. The point is, whatever gifts he gave you, don't shy away from them. I know sometimes in humility we're like, oh, I'm not that good at it. But God gave it to you. You didn't give it to yourself. So embrace the giftedness in the situation he's given you. I think that's huge for trying to figure out, so what direction should I take?
Yeah.
So
I think too, like for me, I know like it's easier to identify those like more solid skill-based gifts. I'm more of a soft gift. I've been given more soft gifts. Relationally, I've always been a very relational. I was the kid in school and in everywhere that was in trouble for talking to my neighbor. But I see now relationships.
Yes.
That's a way that God gifted me.
Yeah.
And so finding a space where I can be in a role that allows me to relationally be with other people and to help others develop relationally. Like it's not a gift I ever thought about until probably within the last few years that, wow, it's like, no, that's a gift too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes oddly around church, there's a little storyline of, oh, you should sacrifice, right? And what I think sometimes people think is like, oh, so the things that come easy to me and I'm good at, I probably shouldn't do those. I should go do. I'm like, no. You should do the things you're good at.
Yeah.
And then put your whole self in and sacrifice yourself in that realm. That's the sacrificial responsibility.
Yes.
Pour yourself out in alignment with how God created you.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love that. I hope that helps people out there. Yeah. So the guys versus the ladies responses on the Suncrest survey.
I'm just going to state a couple facts here, right?
Okay.
So Suncrest, we don't try to hide this. We want to be a place where young dads connect. It's a big part. It's not exclusively that. It's just like, no, we are focused on making sure our church is for that. In lots of churches, honestly, it's 70% women and 30% men. It's very common in churches for that to be. That's not the case at Suncrest. Our percentages of men are not quite at 50%, but strong. In our last survey we did just in May, it's interesting. One of the questions we ask is, hey, are you interested in taking a next step at Suncrest? That can mean a number of things, but it's just like, okay, am I interested in going beyond the weekend service, right? And I asked my assistant, I'm like, hey, could you break out those answers, male and female? And I was shocked, Stephanie. About twice as many women as men answered that question to say, I'm not interested.
Wow.
Yeah. I thought it would be the opposite. I
Yeah.
thought it would be men who were saying, I'm not interested in the next step. But apparently the guys are. In today's world, at our church, in May of 2025, it's a few guys saying I'm not interested, and it was a lot of women. So I'm like, oh, one of the things I have to let jostle me sometimes is I have a picture of what our church is, and then I have to realize when my picture is the wrong picture. And I'm like, oh, my picture was the women are probably more willing to jump in and be involved, and I need to be harder on the guys. But I'm just throwing facts here. At Suncrest, among people who are taking their steps into our church, it was women who were saying to twice as much, I'm not interested in the next step, and guys who are more hungry. So what do you do with that?
Well, man, like, I wonder why. And I don't know if it's that I think, just as a mom, and there's a lot of things that, even like
It's overwhelming.
it can be overwhelming that it's like, I can't take any more on right now. I'm at my capacity. But I sort of feel like my husband feels the same. You know what I mean? So that's surprising to me. But do you think that the turnout for some of the Wednesday mornings is a
I
reflection
think it is.
of that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are some things going on culturally right now, actually, where guys and faith, there's a little bit of a resurgence
Yeah.
in that. And it is some guys looking for purpose, looking for something to plant their foot on. And so we're seeing that. But I do get that, I mean, women do feel overwhelmed. Guys feel overwhelmed too. Guys feel like the machine. I think that's, that reference I want to keep bringing up because I think guys really do feel that way. But that's always a trick for us in leading a church, is because we know that though you are overwhelmed right now and you do feel like a machine, if you would take a next step, I know it feels like one more thing to you.
Right.
But actually what it does is it kind of opens up like, I needed this part of life. This makes me less overwhelmed, even though, I always say one of the thresholds for success in my men's group is if guys are going to come spend an hour with me on Saturday mornings, which means they're probably spending 2 hours away from their wife and their kids, I want their wife to be happy that they're doing it. Right?
Right.
So a guy's going to disappear for 2 hours every Saturday morning.
Right.
And their wife's like, you keep doing that.
Right.
I'm like, I know I'm winning when that's the case, because people who were overwhelmed stepped into something, but then they felt the benefit.
Right.
The relationships, the camaraderie, the friendships.
The safe space
Safe space.
to be able to talk about whatever's going on. And I know, like, in leading a group too, so many times it's a conversation that someone else is having, that they're not even the person talking about their problem, but they're hearing someone else talking and they hear a piece of themselves or their story or what they're struggling with in it. And it's like listening to this therapy session that they go through, and they can walk away and be like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is usually what Mitch does on the podcast. He looks at the camera and is like, so get in a group or get on a serving team.
Get in a group or a serving team, especially guest experience.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Love to have you.
I love it. All right. So one more big question.
Okay.
Probably the biggest concept that I feel like I went too fast through in my message was about co-creating a vision with your spouse for your marriage. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
I know when we chatted, that was something that resonated with you too. So I'll let you go first, and then I'll kind of share some thoughts. But like, when you think about how important it is, and maybe why we don't sometimes co-create, like, let's hear what Stephanie has to say.
In family life especially, I think it can get so busy and so much other stuff that takes the spot that one person can end up taking on a lot of that and bossing the other person around, for lack of a better word. But taking a look at that, both the things, but also relationally, and sharing the stuff that needs to be done, because there are certain things that the kids need to get here and do that, and people need to eat and all of that. But when there is maybe a communication breakdown there, and someone feels out of balance at home, how do they start that?
Yeah, but the posture for how you start that
Yes.
is everything,
Yes.
right? Because I mean, it's so easy just to be like, oh, I got to be efficient, so I'm just going to tell her what we're going to do, or tell him what we're going to do, or say, hey, I need you to do this. And that can be tasks, but sometimes it's like the vision for how you're raising kids, right? It's like the vision for how our faith life is developing. And, I said, I think this is what came out of the message, was the brokenness of this world was predicted in Genesis. Wives will try to control their husbands, and husbands will try to rule over their wives. And I'm like, I see it all the time.
Yeah.
I see it all the time. And this is where bad marriages come from.
Right.
Right? Either one of those or both of them. And I mean, this is really the tug of war in marriages. Oh, when she starts to try to control, I start to try to rule over, and then she tries to control some more. And it's like, that's a spiral, is what that is.
Right.
Right? So how do you get out of that?
And
Well,
it takes that honest, look at it, first of all, for both of them to say, this isn't how we want it to be.
right. And the we is everything in that.
Yeah.
This isn't how we want it to be.
Right.
Right. And, honestly, I talked to a lot of couples who I encourage them to go seek counseling, right? And maybe one of them resists it for a while, but it's that point in life, it's like, hey, actually, neither one of us want what this is, right? And if we're going to be better together, it's not going to come from me getting on board with her or her getting on board with me.
Yeah.
It's going to come from us stepping back together and say, what do we want this to be? And supporting each other through that process. And be like, okay, I think this comes back sometimes, when someone's married maybe to someone who doesn't share the faith or doesn't share it as strongly as they feel they do, they're like, I just need to get him in here, right? To get on board, join a group, do it. And I'm like, listen, he's got a whole way of thinking about the world himself. And it would be good for you to listen to him.
Yeah.
That's how he thinks about the world. If you want him to listen to you,
Right.
and vice versa, it can go husband or wife. But that sense that we're both stepping back and we're going to create something together. I just read something from Tim Keller, brilliant pastor, passed away a few years ago. And what he said was, if both people in the marriage basically work on their own selfishness, you're going to have a great marriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
1 Corinthians 13, it's the cardinal sin of love is being self-seeking. And, I was joking actually with Mitch last week and saying oh, yeah, when we got married, I knew two were going to become one. I just thought she was going to become me.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not how it works. Right? And I'm not going to become her.
Right.
So if we are two,
Right.
and we have to get to a unified vision together, the only way there is to step back and create it together.
Yeah.
And that is give and take. And sometimes I think when you're maybe the Christian, or you think of yourself honestly with a little spiritual superiority in the relationship, it can in really nasty ways cause you to think, but in this area, he needs to get on board with me or she needs to get on board with me.
Right.
And I'm like, oh,
And that is not love.
that's not love.
That is not love. And you can't work with that. You can't shift with that. And it's not allowing that person the space to grow. And even though we think we know our spouses so well, which we do in certain ways, we don't actually know what they need truly. Only God does. And I feel like so many times I found myself having to step back, even when I think I can see it, or I've said it many times. And I just have to allow him his space to process and to go through it, because without him processing it, and I'm sure he's done the same thing, it's so frustrating. It can be so frustrating. But without allowing us to be individuals,
right,
within the confines of our oneness and our one life, and allowing us to transform, it doesn't actually happen from the inside, which is in my experience the only way to actually have it fully take root
Mhm.
and then to grow into something beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, I see a lot of marriages that aren't having the hard conversation,
Yep.
and there's something blocking that.
Mhm.
And I do want to encourage them. It's worth it,
Yeah.
you
Lean
know,
into it,
right?
right?
It's like if you can put your sword and your shield down,
Yeah.
and allow for that to really hear them and what they need, even if it hurts, but
Mhm.
understanding that from all of that hard conversation, like you can build
Yeah.
this beautiful life, truly, that you've been gifted. You can have a beautiful marriage. You really can, that both of you love. And you only have this right here in this lifetime to do it. It's like,
Yeah.
but that if that's simmering under the surface and it isn't allowed out.
Mhm. Yeah, I want to come back to that metaphor of put your sword and your shield down, right? Because when we say, hey, a lot of people don't have hard conversations, and then when they do, sword and shield are up, right?
Right.
This is how we imagine hard conversations. Like, well, I guess I'm gonna
Battle.
go have a battle with him so I can win,
Right.
so I can get my way, so I can get her to see how I see the world.
Right.
But oh my goodness, somebody out there needs to hear this. Put your sword and your shield down, and then go have the hard conversation.
Yeah.
So I like to make things almost as simple and practical as I can. And one of the things I'd say, like, oh, how would you know if you're co-creating a vision? And I think the answer is, well, what have you been cheering on about your spouse's vision lately?
Yeah. Do you
Like,
know your
do you
spouse's
know your
vision?
spouse's vision?
Right. Do you talk about it?
Yeah. Do you know what they want, what
Yeah.
they desire for your family? And again, you're not automatically going to both be on the same page about things. You have to talk through these things, but that cheerleader role from
Mhm.
a husband to a wife, to be you're in her corner. She knows the vision she has. You're gonna help create that,
Mhm.
right? And then when it's mutual, it's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
But man, if you could just be the cheerleader for your spouse's vision, um, don't let this week go by without being like,
Yeah.
how am I doing at that? And if I'm not, how do I get there?
I'm curious to know, with you leading groups, you've multiple groups of young men,
Mhm.
what is something that would their wives and the women who love them can do to help them move in the ways that of many of the points that you went through this sermon, of their own growth, the sacrificial, they're trying to transform. As women, I think that we are sort of born environment creators. We grow life literally within us.
Yes.
And I think that that's just a natural gifting. And I think that we can create a space externally for our husbands to grow. What are some ways that women and wives can help create a space and uplift and, like you said, encourage
Mm-hmm.
that you see maybe that they're lacking, or something that we're doing that is prohibiting or discouraging that growth?
Yeah. I have an answer to your question, but I'm going to frame it with a little bit of a question itself, because creating that environment, right, is like, I think it's one of the things that's so let's rewind to the 1950s, right? Guys went to work, women stayed at home. That was largely true, not exclusively true. And then there was a sense in which, and there would be an environment maybe the husband would walk into when he comes home, right? Now, we can in some ways even rightfully be like, yeah, let's not go back to that,
Right.
right? But what's happened? Lots of two-income families. I mean, my wife works and I work, and the space that used to exist to create environments, I think there's just so much pressure in life. It feels like, oh, there's no room to create that. It starts to become almost like, how could you expect me to
Mm.
create that? You feel a little disdain even in
Mhm.
the relationship toward the other. And so I'm like, oh, just the idea. And I'm going to say husbands and wives. I do appreciate you saying, okay, what do guys need? But like, oh, the environments that our spouses walk into. I mean, just take the temperature of that,
Mhm.
right? And I'm not talking about, you can do this if you want. I'm not talking about, you know, a glass of iced tea the moment they walk in the door.
Right. Or even like the cleanliness level.
Yeah.
It's how
It's
relationally,
relational
it's what,
warmth.
yes, what do
It's
we
warmth.
feel? You can feel that when you walk into a room with someone.
My goodness.
Is it
Well,
warm and loving, or is it,
yeah, I'm glad to be home and I'm glad you're here.
yes, yes.
And our postures, our orientation, I mean, I was talking this past week about embracing something, like just our open arms to be like, yeah, instead of, I mean, yeah. So let me answer your specific question. What do I think guys need? Young dads need. Um, I think women don't appreciate, wives particularly don't appreciate that you hold guys' egos in your hand. You really do. You can crush it or you can make it flourish. And it's not that complicated. If he feels like he's winning,
Mm.
he flourishes. And if he feels like he's losing, he's crushed. Now, again, he might be losing. He might be doing terrible things, and like you have to reconcile those tough things. But the feeling he's getting from you is going to have an effect on him, right? And what did I say one of the worst things for masculinity is? And guys have to take responsibility for this no matter how your wives are handling it. One of the worst things is guys either are passive, they back out, or they're hostile, right? They get real aggressive. Those are two bad paths for men. But I think this all fits together, right? Well, what am I walking into? If I'm walking into warmth, if I'm walking into encouragement, if I'm walking into someone who can say 3 or 4 nice things before harder things later.
Someone who likes me.
Someone who likes me.
Like, forget about love. Like, of course, you hope that. But
Yes.
someone who just likes you around.
Then the chance that I'm going to disappear to the garage, the basement, or the bar, which is passivity, right? Or that I'm going to amp up and come down hard on you, they're just mitigated in the most beautiful of ways. And we help each other be who God wants us to be.
Right.
So, and just to flip it, because I think this is so important, like, okay, and guys, we create environments, right? You may not think this is the best thing I'm at, but I mean, whether it's celebrations of occasions, like noticing what makes your wife tick, like a simple gift, or taking the kids, or just, you getting home from work early to create something, like these things really matter.
Yeah. I always told Mike, I said, I want to feel cherished. He goes, what do you want? I want to feel cherished. And whatever that means. And he knows, and I think other husbands know how, because they probably did it in the beginning.
Yeah.
The
word cherish is a great word, Stephanie. And I think it is a little more oriented toward women than it is toward men. But, when I do the traditional vows at a wedding, they promise to love, honor, and cherish, right? And I always stop and I say, do you know how many people there are in this world who would give anything to be cherished, to have someone who actually cherishes them? And in this wedding ceremony, I'm saying that what you have today is the promise from someone else for the rest of your life. You got somebody who cherishes you. But we know in real life that early experience can get stale, right? And it can be diminished. So to keep that cherished piece.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to be like, well, what would cherish look like for a guy? I think, this is a very guy way to say it, but it's almost like an attaboy, sort of way. Like, guys don't get compliments. I think actually when I see women relate to one another, a lot of times they'll lead with a compliment. Oh, I love your hair. I love this. Like, guys do not do that.
Yeah.
Right. And we make fun of each other is what we do. We do the opposite of it. We dig at each other and we want it to be received as a compliment. But we long for all the same things.
Right.
So one compliment from someone who knows us better than anyone else knows us, one word of encouragement, one attaboy, one I see how hard you're working, like all those things.
Just the true deep appreciation.
Yeah.
And regularly.
Yeah. And we're back to cheering each other on.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So,
Wow.
All right. I think that's enough for today.
Cool.
What do you think? Thank you for joining us, and Necessary Masculinity. That's a wrap.
Thank you.